Hello, everybody, and welcome to our last installment of the Lunch and Learn series for the California Association of Museums. We hope you've enjoyed this wonderful series that we have, and I know today is going to be another great conversation. My name is Vicki Walwerchek. I'm the exhibits curator at Cabrillo Marine Aquarium in San Pedro. I'm also on the board for CAM as well as a co-host or a co-chair of the programs committee. And I'm honored to be here today as the host for this wonderful panelist group that is here, and we appreciate all of their time. The topic today is a new chapter for NAGPRA, and we've got some wonderful panelists, Desiree Martinez, Mario Pallari, and Buffy McQuillen that are going to be joining us. As we begin this event, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. California is home to over 150 tribes, and an acknowledgement is just one step towards working with Native communities in meaningful relationships. Museums and many institutions were founded upon purposeful exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples and still benefit from settler colonialism and associated harms. CAM is committed to moving beyond land acknowledgements and into action. We encourage you and all your organizations to find out more about the tribes in your areas and find ways to celebrate and support them. I'm on the traditional territory of the Tongva peoples, and we are going to put a link in the chat, and you can check this resource to learn more about the tribes in your area. And this is a resource. We understand that it's not definitive, but it's a good place to get some more information. And thank you all for being here today. We're going to just talk about a couple different or a few housekeeping tips. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our CAM YouTube. Once it is posted and uploaded, we'll be sending a link to all the people who have registered so you can have this. So please feel free to, just listen and don't worry about taking notes or anything. This is all going to be back up and running for you. Live captioning is available through National Captioning Institute. And so for those of you just joining, we'll also put a chat. Rochelle is behind the scenes. She's going to be posting links in the chat, and you can check that out there for the live captioning. And the presenters will respond to questions at the very end of this presentation, and you can use the link at the bottom of the screen for you to write questions into the question and answer icon. So please feel free to do that at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And the chat will be available to message the host and the panelists. So please feel free to use that if you'd like to get in touch with them. And finally, for this, if you have any technical issues, please feel free to message the host, using the chat, or you can send an email to programs@calmuseums.org, and Rochelle will do her best to address any of your questions there. So thank you for that. And then finally, before we get started, this event, this CAM Lunch and Learn, is part of the free webinar series, and it's exclusively sponsored by Belfour Property Restoration. Belfour is the worldwide leader in integrated disaster recovery and restoration services. With over 450 locations and a team of more than 11,000 skilled professionals at your service, Belfour is ready for any disaster. They have the experience, the resources, and the capabilities to respond to any disaster, large or small. Belfour offers more recovery services than any other restoration contractor. And if you want to learn more about them, please go to belfour.com. Thank you so much. And I am going to pass this over to Denise to get started. Desiree to get started. I'm sorry, Desiree.
Well, that's what my dad wanted to name me. So thank you.
I must have known that.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. And what I'm going to be doing is talking about and just giving a brief overview of NAGPRA, because I can do a whole day-long discussion about it, but really focusing on the changes that have occurred in NAGPRA because starting in January of 2024. Next slide. So one of the big things that I really like to stress when I am talking to museum professionals is that NAGPRA really starts and ends, should start and end with tribal consultation. It's at the heart of NAGPRA and CalNAGPRA, which Mario will be talking about later. And really consultation is not something that needs to be looked at as being checked off a box, you sent a letter, etc., but it's about developing a collaborative, respectful, and sensitive relationship with both the Native American communities and other individuals that they may bring in order to better repatriate their collections. It really is something that should be at the heart of anything that you do. Next slide, please. So one of the big things that is because tribal consultation is really important for NAGPRA and its new regulations is that there is actually now a definition of consultation. And because a lot of museums always thinking about checking boxes and sending out letters, that this definition of consultation was really necessary. So it's the exchange of information, open discussions, joint and good faith deliberations to seek, discuss, and consider the views of all parties involved. All of this is, again, to make sure that ancestors and their cultural items are returned to the appropriate communities as efficiently and expeditially as possible. So again, this is something now that is in the regulations because a lot of museums were not meeting that good faith effort. Next slide, please. So what is the basics of NAGPRA? And basically, when I talk to various entities and museums, one of the big things is that this law applies to any entity that receives federal funds, whether the agent applies to also federal agencies. And if you have a project that needed a federal permit that resulted in collections, then you have to comply with NAGPRA. One of the biggest changes in terms of who the law applies to is now that any museum that has received loans from a federal program now has to comply with NAGPRA. So if you happen to be a business that got those PPP loans because of COVID, you now have to comply with NAGPRA as well. Next slide. And so what are the items that, or what should I say, what are the activities that NAGPRA applies to? So inadvertent discoveries, usually everybody thinks about the collections of museums, but NAGPRA goes further than that. So inadvertent discoveries, meaning that if there happens to be a project on any of those reasons, if there's monies, permits, etc., you have to comply with NAGPRA, and there's a whole second other part of NAGPRA that applies to that, whether there's a planned excavation, and then, of course, what we're going to be talking about today, existing collections and found new collections by various entities and museums. Next slide. And so who does NAGPRA engage in thinking about the collections that museums have and seeing who you're going to talk to? You're first going to talk to lineal descendants. And so if you have a Native American collection and you know where the collections lie, if you can actually reach out to a family member that an item might actually belong to, that's the first group of people that you would reach out to. A lot of historic collections, particularly held by the Smithsonian, were items or people actually that were taken from the battlefields, and those items and people were named. And so you would try to find the people that were descended from that individual or those collections, and you would consult with them. And in the absence of lineal descendants, finding a direct lineal descendant, then you're going to look to federally recognized tribes, Native American, Native Alaskan villages, as well as Native Hawaiian groups. Well, the biggest change here for NAGPRA is that state recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes no longer have any standing. National NAGPRA has identified that every land within the United States has been claimed by a federally recognized tribe. And so you will be working under NAGPRA with those communities. Next. So what are the items that can be claimed under NAGPRA? One of them is human remains. The other one are funerary objects. So those items that were found or those items that were found in a burial or have been used for those funerary ceremonies, sacred objects, those items that communities feel are instilled with power, as well as items of cultural patrimony. And those are items that are not owned by an individual or can't be owned by an individual, but maybe owned by clans, etc. And one of the biggest changes, again, with NAGPRA, in terms of these items, is that objects that incorporate human remains are now considered human remains. In the past, if there was another item such as a war shield that had a scalp attached to it and was collected, that wasn't considered human remains. They could be claimed under a different category, but now anything that incorporates human remains now is considered human remains. Next slide. So one of the biggest things to think about in terms of not only does NAGPRA apply to you, but are your collections, who has control and who has custody. So control is actually having the legal interest in items that states that you are lawfully permitted or own those collections, whereas custody is the physical possession of NAGPRA items. And the change in 2024 is extended that definition of custody as having the obligation to care for an object or item that you don't have control or an interest in, but it's still considered within your possession and being able to take care of it. Next slide. So part of the NAGPRA process includes submitting inventories and summaries to National NAGPRA. With an inventory is an item by item description of culturally identifiable human remains and associated funerary objects, while summaries are the descriptions of collections that contain unassociated funerary objects, sacred objects, and items of cultural patrimony. One of the biggest changes in National NAGPRA is that these inventories and summaries cannot be completed without consultation with those tribes that are affiliated with those collections. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but it's up to the tribes to decide which items in your collections fall under which category that NAGPRA allows. Next slide. So what is cultural affiliation? Cultural affiliation is the ability to show that there is a shared group identity between the collections and the tribe that is claiming to be culturally affiliated with those collections. And this cultural affiliation is based on all of the information that's available: geographical, kinship, biological, archaeological, anthropological, linguistic, folklore, oral tradition, historical evidence, and other information or expert opinion. Next slide. So one of the biggest changes to NAGPRA now is that, like I stated, culturally unidentifiable definition. So those human remains that you could not find a Native American, federally recognized tribe to be culturally affiliated with them has been removed. And so when you're looking to do that cultural affiliation, there's a big dependence now should be deference to the tribal knowledge that is given during tribal consultation. And previously there was, when you were looking at the full data that was provided in order to do cultural affiliation, a lot of museums it used to be preponderance of the evidence. So most of the information that was given, you can correctly say that a tribe is affiliated with a collection, but now you only need one line of evidence in order to make that cultural affiliation. And most importantly as well, you don't need any more studies or additional research in order to make that affiliation. Some museums were using additional research to kind of hinder the process. So you have to make the decision in cultural affiliation based on the information you have currently. Additionally, the cultural affiliation does not require a continuity through time. So if there happens to be a gap in that shared group identity or the information that tribes provide, That shouldn't stop that cultural affiliation. And then also that, again, if there are gaps, that's okay, as long as, again, that information, that one line of evidence that the tribe provides will help with that cultural affiliation. Next slide. So another really important change in NAGPRA is the idea of duty of care. And this means that it's the free, prior, informed consent from tribes in order for a museum to exhibit, allow access to, or research on human remains and cultural items that are listed under NAGPRA. And this obviously requires consultation on a good faith effort to incorporate Native American traditional knowledge in all deliberations. And I use an example here of the Gabrielino Tongva community working with the Autry Museum of the American West, where they were moving the collections to a new space, and they outreach to the local community because a lot of the collections were affiliated with the Gabrielino Tongva community, and we provided them with guidance on how the collections should be cared for while it was in their custody until they can get repatriated. And that's something that needs to occur now under federal NAGPRA. Next slide. So the other updates for NAGPRA is the protection of sensitive information. A lot of times NAGPRA relied on other federal laws to make sure that information that is provided during tribal consultation is kept confidential. Now the law is specific in talking about that confidentiality, but also reminding everybody and the tribes as well as that information is still sensitive information that is given during that consultation process is still subject to the Freedom of Information Act, as well as other state record laws. Also, there are civil penalties that can be levied upon institutions. That's always been there, but now it can be levied through the entire NAGPRA process. So it could be at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And those penalties can be the base number is 7,475. That's kind of the minimal penalty, but it can go and increase depending on the harm that was given to the communities and the ceremonial, cultural, archaeological, historical, and commercial value of the materials that were involved. And so that is all that I have to provide. And the next up is Mario.
Thank you, Desiree. I always learn something from you, so I appreciate you kicking it off. My name is Mario Pallari. I'm staff counsel for the Native American Heritage Commission. And we have a slide coming up that's our homepage of the NAHC. But while we're waiting for that, I will give kind of an overview of what the NAHC does. Desiree, you added some context as to what NAGPRA captures other than just repatriation. So I'll talk about what we at the NAHC do. We're a state agency that's responsible for facilitating tribal consultation in the CEQA and city planning process, as well as determining most likely descendants when there's an inadvertent discovery of human remains. And lastly, facilitating repatriation under CalNAGPRA. CalNAGPRA has very similar language to NAGPRA now that NAGPRA has updated its regulations. And CalNAGPRA applies to any institution that's in possession or control of Native American human remains and cultural items, and also receives state funds. A large majority of collections due to the new NAGPRA regulations are going to be subject to NAGPRA as well. What we have on our website here is you'll see a CalNAGPRA tab. First, to start off with our database is a tracking and visibility database so that all collections that are going through CalNAGPRA or are located in California and going through NAGPRA are visible on our CalNAGPRA database website. Collections that are moving forward through the NAGPRA process are required to be updated to the CalNAGPRA database if they are located in California. The two statutes, CalNAGPRA and NAGPRA, are designed to be run concurrently. So there are catch-up provisions in our database that allow for a inventory or summary to comply with both NAGPRA and CalNAGPRA at the same time. There's a way to request access to this database. If you are a repatriation coordinator or a representative of a tribe, and you click on the CalNAGPRA database, there's access to request an account, and our staff can be in contact with you about verifying that account as well. Next up, something else that I'd like to talk about is the campus repatriation committees pursuant to both AB 275 and AB 389. AB 275 created the requirement that the UC campuses and system-wide had committees that facilitated and oversaw repatriation and repatriation policy. Recently, AB 389 was passed that also required that of the California state universities, and the NAHC has been working to fill those committees out. It's a lot of seats, and there's a lot of demand for individuals with this type of experience in repatriation. If you see that link there, you see system-wide campus and oversight committees. There's vacancies that need to be filled, especially for tribal representatives. So I encourage you to contact or reach out to anyone you know that may have experience as in repatriation or consultation with state agencies. And then lastly, we have a CalNAGPRA resources and FAQ tab. There's been a lot of questions about CalNAGPRA in regard to the new NAGPRA regulations, and I'm sure we'll have a few of those at the end of the chat. So that is pretty much what I have. We also are working on draft regulations. So if you'd like to see our regulations that we've done tribal consultation on, they're also right there on the proposed regulations tab. But I will pass it now off to Buffy unless there's any questions. Right. I think we're supposed to hold questions to the end, so I shouldn't have queued that. There you go, Buffy.
Thank you, Mario. Thanks, Desiree, for really setting forth what the requirements are. Hi, everyone. My name is Buffy McQuillen. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Federated Indians of Graton Rancheria. I'm also the designated repatriation representative for the tribe, and then also want to let everybody know I, have the honor, the distinct honor of serving on the Native American Heritage Commission. I'm currently the vice chairperson and was appointed by Governor Newsom in 2021. So I'm also currently serving on the UC system-wide committee, which came out of state laws and really those changes that Mario just spoke about, and really trying to uplift NAGPRA responsibilities and requirements here in the state of California. So just a little bit about my background. I've been working for Graton Rancheria for a little more than 9 years, and spent most of my career working in repatriation for other tribes, and essentially feeling a lot of the frustration that I think a lot of tribes currently feel with respect to being able to repatriate ancestral remains, funeral items, cultural items for ceremonies. And so, really probably the biggest shift I think came, with the updated California NAGPRA law a few years back under Assemblyman Ramos. And that really sort of spurred, I think, a lot of the movement of the UC issue and a lot of the state agencies. Unfortunately, it really took a lot more, and I think we're finally seeing the most work happening with the federal changes, with a lot of the clarifying regs, as Desiree mentioned, have really given clarity, I think, for a lot of the museums and institutions to really understand the direction that they need to take inventories and summaries, and ultimately repatriation claims, and giving those deadlines. And really, I think firmly, stating how to do cultural affiliation. So in our work, some of the recent work that we've been doing repatriation, obviously, for many years, and prior to my time, spent most of the time at Graton Rancheria doing archaeological monitoring on projects. And now this new era really gives the tribe the opportunity to not just, stand in the field in construction and, watch ancestors leave and depart and go to shelves, but to really be active in managing, sacred sites, literally as they're under construction, but also using the new regulations and using, CEQA and NEPA and NHPA to really not create new collections. That ultimately, the tribe would have to then turn around in an inventory and summary mode and try to repatriate. And so, it really has sort of changed, I think, the overall cultural landscape, literally in terms of NAGPRA for the tribe. Some of the work that I have been doing as of late is really consulting with a lot of state agencies about what is a cultural item, and re-identifying and kind of reiterating, I would say, what the tribe and tribes that I've worked for previously have been saying, which is archaeological collections are cultural items. And really, when, many years ago, agencies and institutions really shut the door, would not process claims, would never really want to hear that, archaeological collections, everything from, debitage to, literal arrowheads or, mortars, were eligible under NAGPRA. And, I can say, definitively, y'all can look in the Federal Register that, in fact, they have been repatriated. They, we have spent a couple of years now repatriating thousands, not just of ancestors, but also all of their cultural items in association with those sacred sites. Actually back to the tribe, have been successful in some of those. So, for Graton Rancheria, it's been about repatriating, things in a holistic manner, in a very comprehensive approach, looking across institutions that, have big collections, have very small collections, some literally might have just, a few mortars that are in association with those sacred sites, but also, upwards of, 800 to 1,000 ancestral remains and those funerary items that unfortunately were taken with them at the time of, a building being built, or, a university professor doing, an excavation, in the early 1900s. And so, that's been a lot of the work and a lot of the consultation that we've picked up in recent months, and really have made, I think, really big strides and progressive movement toward getting those actually into the Federal Register. One of the things that we encountered just recently with a lot of agencies is they've never submitted any of this information, any of their collections, to Federal NAGPRA. And so that big boost from Federal NAGPRA now is really, for us, helping us actually get a lot of the collections that the tribe has really, found to be the most problematic for them, to actually finally, moving towards the Federal Register and getting those notices out, and then finally being able to actually repatriate them. And so, we're expecting probably in the next few months, several of those collections finally coming forward and actually, getting noticed and finally kind of overcoming, I think, what's been really a pretty big mountain for the tribe, and probably several other tribes across California and nationwide, that quite frankly have had the door shut, in front of us, and really never being able to even truly consult or negotiate the return of those types of collections. So that, I wanted to share, I think, really from a practitioner side of, how we're actually doing cultural affiliation is really just that one line. The tribe many years ago developed a cultural affiliation study, and it has, been, really it just sets out the history, the territory, and that document alone just gets widely shared, and is easy enough to just check that box on cultural affiliation very quickly and seamlessly. So I want to stop there and open up to any questions. I know we have some already in the chat, so I'll kick it back to, I think, Desiree and Mario.
We do have a couple also in the question and answer. The first one says, my university's museum in Oregon has a funerary object cataloged as, quote, burial beads that we would like to return. Sadly, all we know is that the beads came from California. We have no other information about its origin. How would we go about identifying which tribes to consult?
You want to take that, Mario?
No problem. Sorry, I took a second there. The Native American Heritage Commission maintains a contact list, which is a list of culturally affiliated tribes in California and their cultural contacts. So their THPOs or those that are handling environmental matters or repatriation matters. There is on our website the ability to access or request that form, and an analyst will be in touch with you to provide that form, either at the statewide or by county.
Great, thank you for that. Another question here says, do archival collections fall under NAGPRA? For example, photographs, documents, and/or objects that an archive may hold?
Technically, they don't. However, as part of good practice and starting that relationship and collaborative and respectful relationship with Native American tribes, it is something that you should bring to the attention during consultation. I know that there are a number of photographs, for instance, in some museums that have separate libraries that are pictures of ancestral remains as well as funerary objects. And those may be things that the tribes may want to whether have access to or start to have discussions about limiting access to those types of materials.
Maybe if I can chime in also, one of the ways in which I've had to utilize a lot of those, and like, if you were to go to Berkeley, they as an institution have like the Bancroft Library, which is a tremendous resource. They have other small linguistic collections. As Desiree said, opening those up, opening the door, introducing people may help a tribe actually identify things better or more soundly, decisively. And so I would say you're not necessarily repatriating those items in the same sense of what we do with cultural items, but the research material in itself could prove to be something that a tribe needs in order to actually just be more definitive and to not have to breach the, for the tribe, the confidentiality of their traditional practitioners, but to maybe use those photographs or those documents to really illustrate, points that, they may not be comfortable, having that information documented. And so, we have used photographs that show ceremony, and given those as examples. But otherwise, we would have to like bring people to traditional ceremonies, which is, that's just not going to work all the time. But, at the same time, to have those photographs, I think can lend itself to tribes being able to claim items.
Another question, how do you proceed if multiple tribes with cultural affiliation are invited to consult and disagree on the correct identification of a cultural item? not ancestral remains or AFO, and its ultimate disposition, assuming neither is federally recognized, but both are California state recognized.
Mario.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Well, in this, we're kind of talking about one side of the coin, which is just the tribes and just the items, but there is the other side of the coin too, which is this institution subject to NAGPRA? Because if it is subject to NAGPRA based off the funding that the institution receives, then there would also be the consideration of what happens when disputes arise under NAGPRA. So I guess I would say that it really is case specific for every collection, but ensuring that you're not just getting an answer from CalNAGPRA, but also NAGPRA as well, is going to be critical in ensuring that you comply with both federal and state law.
Also can add, as I just said, one of the things that has not happened is a lot of these collections being noticed in the federal process. And so, what came out of CalNAGPRA is inventories and summaries, and really open that up to everybody that was on the Native American Heritage Commission contact list, which is, obviously a bigger list in California than what you see on the Federal Register of federally recognized tribes. And so, that sort of created a lot of momentum. And I think a lot of that discourse around what is it, who's the right tribe and whatnot. But as Mario just said, it could be that these collections need to actually get noticed under federal NAGPRA. And if they were, does that, then open it up to, a tribe with federal status to be able to repatriate them? That in itself has sort of changed the dynamic of who's making claims. And if there is a federally recognized tribe who is willing to step up under the new allowances of, the clarifying regs to actually repatriate on behalf of other tribes that, where they may be more willing to negotiate, more willing to find some common ground. That's a whole nother layer of negotiations that is happening in California. I think that, some of them are very promising. We saw them, emerge in the 1011 regs. They were not like, a lot of them, but it has happened. I think the other thing, that I caught in that question is there's an assumption in there that there's a state recognition process, and there is not in the state of California. So there's no such thing as a state recognized tribe. There are tribes on the contact list that have met criteria at different times to be put on there. But again, as Mario said, the Native American Heritage Commission is going through a regulatory process of making those regs now. And so that may change, how, cultural affiliation of tribal groups happens in the state of California. Or it may keep it the same, who knows? But that process is finally happening, and that will, I think, also help people understand what it means to be on the contact list. And because we do oftentimes hear, folks say, well, they're state recognized. And unfortunately, the state of California has not created up that very unique system that other states have for those tribes that, are not able to attain federal status and that political sovereignty.
Thank you. I want to jump to the chat really quickly too, because there was a question that was asked and answered during the panel. So I want to make sure we recognize that. Somebody had asked, I thought LA County didn't have any federally recognized tribes. And Desiree did answer, there are no federally recognized tribes located in LA County, but there are tribes in the surrounding counties that claim LA County as their traditional territory. So I just wanted to make sure we shared that in case other people had that same question. And there is another question here in the chat that says, we believe we have objects that are Native American and tribes may like to have repatriated. However, we have very minimal and sometimes no information about these objects. Our understanding is that the new NAGPRA regs require consultation and consent prior to any additional research. However, as a small organization with little expertise and no native staff, feel a bit helpless. How do we proceed? Is there any advice on that?
One of the things that has been, so if you guys don't know, National NAGPRA has been having these webinars every month to talk about the nuances of complying with the new regulations under federal NAGPRA. And one of the big things we've been discussing about was what constitutes research, right? And so research, if you're looking for information for provenience, so that you can then hopefully identify potentially culturally affiliated tribes, that can occur. And you can reach out to experts in order to see if they could identify those cultural items. But ultimately, particularly for those, and this actually relates back to that question of where it's just California and you just have Native American items. I know a long time ago, there was actually one tribe that made a claim for an ancestor that was just from the United States. And so I think that's, and it got repatriated. And so I think that's something that's going to probably end up happening, is that there's going to be a lot of collections that you just don't know and could be from a number of different communities. And ultimately, you need to offer them to, under federal NAGPRA, potentially culturally affiliated tribes. So if you don't know where it came from, technically, potentially culturally affiliated tribes would be all of the tribes in the United States, and say, we don't have this information. And that's going to be, as you go through, there's going to be a lot of that because of the lack of documentation, or particularly if collections were pot hunted and then given to an institution. It's something that's going to end up having to be discussed and worked out amongst the tribes. So that it's sort of advice, but also, I think it's going to be something that's going to have to be discussed nationwide as we start working with those collections with no provenience information.
Thank you. Another question here, is it ethical to give another tribe decision-making power over another tribe's artifacts? For example, would the Tataviam, I apologize if I mispronounced that, or the Santa Ynez have control over the Tongva's artifacts since they are federally recognized while the Tongva aren't?
I will respond to that since I happen to be part of the Gabrielino Tongva community. A lot of the non-federally recognized tribes are really upset about the changes in NAGPRA as it relates to removing the possibility of unaffiliated tribes are being able to be have non-federally recognized tribes being affiliated with collections. There are communities that have created relationships, as Buffy was talking about, with federally recognized tribes to make those claims on behalf of the community. So for instance, our community went to Santa Ynez and asked them to make claims for the Southern Channel Islands. And a lot of that was because Malibu, the last chief of the Malibu village, which is on the edge of Gabrielino territory and Chumash territory, was held by a Santa Catalina Island chief. Like, he was from Catalina Island. And so using that shared group identity, we asked them to do that repatriation on our behalf. And now it becomes more critical because we no longer are able to participate in with the 1011 section being X'd out. So, is it ethical? There's a lot of us that, find it hard, but it's one of those things too, is that those non-federally recognized tribes are working with federally recognized tribes because they are our cousins, in order to make sure that the ancestors get back. And that's one of the biggest things. That's what drives me, is that if we can get a federally recognized tribe in order to make claims for our ancestors, and it can be repatriated faster and get them into the ground and back home, then I'm going to support that. Each band and community is different. That's the way that I come at it. But you have to follow what's in the regulations.
I just want to touch on that too, Desiree, because as a tribal person, as a culture practitioner, I guess that the question that oftentimes comes up, for us, as a representative is whether or not Graton Rancheria would use their political status to repatriate, and that's up to the tribe. But as a cultural practitioner, I guess my perspective about it is, like you're saying, Desiree, it's up to the community, it's up to the cultural practitioners, it's up to those who they rely on for traditional knowledge to determine what is cultural. I don't know, I guess, about so much if it's ethical. I don't really think that most people get into an ethical debate about it. The overarching problem is that somebody else was unethical, somebody else failed on the morality spectrum, and we're now in this predicament as present day Indian people to have to do this work and figure it out, and it's not whether or not we like or subscribe to federal process, it's just what is. And so, take all of that away, the really big question is whether or not you can actually, by familial lines, cultural lines, present day California Indian history, whether or not you can actually achieve what you want to achieve as a tribal or as a tribal community, and work with, somebody, a federally recognized tribe, negotiate those agreements, negotiate how that transfer will occur, and as a museum representative, fully expect museum representatives not to get into the cultural political weeds of tribes, but really be open to how those negotiations can happen. Because I feel like, whether you have, federal sovereignty at the highest level of the federal system, I do believe in inherent, sovereignty that existed, many years ago for Indian tribal groups, Indian tribes, prior to, the settlement of the West. So, it really is on that level that I think you're negotiating, amongst one another, amongst, tribes. And, and I think I also want to discard this myth that, every tribe sort of has like these really clear lines of cultural affiliation and who we are as Indian people. For many of us, we may be enrolled in, a Fed tribe or a non-federally recognized tribe, but we are also multiple tribal groups. And the federal system doesn't let us say, well, we're like 6 tribes and hold this status. They've made rules and created these lines that look very black and white, but in actuality, we are multiple tribes. And that is just a really important part of California Indian history and the nation's history, and I have a lot of friends and colleagues across the nation that, they have to pick. And that is, again, another part of American history that really is kind of absurd, because it creates, this misconception that, somehow, we're all just like, this type of Indian and only that. There might be a tribe that, has that clear line, but I don't know them. So, I want to, make sure folks are also kind of seeing it through that lens of who we are, not just politically, but also just really on a cultural front. And we may practice, through marriage, we may practice through just a friendship. All of those things, really are just a part of our stories. So, I kind of want to call that out as, one of kind of the nuances of this kind of strange existence in modern day times.
Thank you for that. Another question, what should museums who do not have any Native American human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and cultural items know about NAGPRA? This attendee works at a museum of art and history, and cultural items that they had in their history exhibit were returned to the Natural History Museum, who had loaned them to them.
I would just one note, I would say keep looking, because there often are collections that are hidden or have been tucked away. Looking at records, ensuring that no staff took any cultural items at any point in the history, any retired staff. Just be really sure of that statement, especially if there was a time when you did have cultural items. We see it all the time. So that's just my note.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's important is I've worked with a lot of institutions where there's these secret doorways or there are places where you wouldn't think ancestors or items would be. So for instance, there was an institution where ancestors were found in the air conditioning ducts. Luckily they were able to be located and then repatriated. So it's really important to, one, do that physical survey, but then also the regulations also state if you find new collections, then you have to comply with NAGPRA. I also was working with an institution where there was, for instance, a Native American headdress that was given to the president one time, and it was being kept in a frame at the art museum. And so it's one of those things too, is that depending, and I don't know what type of art this museum has, but it's still, there might be something there that's been incorporated into that piece of art that may be considered sacred or belonging to a tribe. And so unless you really work with the communities to know whether that exists or not, you should do your due diligence to make sure that you really don't have any cultural items that are subject to federal NAGPRA or CalNAGPRA for that matter.
Another question, are museums on reservation land subject to CalNAGPRA or just NAGPRA?
Federal lands, federal law.
Thanks, Des.
I also want to throw out there too that, you know, because this question came up many years ago with tribes and whether or not they have to abide by, you know, NAGPRA. I think that the new clarifying regs are super helpful. I mean, we knew this answer, you know, 15 years ago, but I think it's even more clear today. It really is about the use of funds. You know, so I guess, you know, with respect to like, is it reservation land? You know, the reservation federal lands under, you know, NAGPRA, there is a process for, you know, having to run a process when you have discoveries. There are, you know, new, I think, clear requirements that were a little bit fuzzy for inadvertent discoveries or for intentional excavations on federal or tribal lands. But I think more importantly is, you know, I oftentimes talk to tribes and their coordinators about ensuring that they are not taking on collections that may be culturally affiliated to other tribes. And so you have like museums on, you know, years ago, the federal government funded a lot of cultural centers and places like that. IMLS does the same thing today. You know, if you are taking in collections and they could be cultural items, but not the tribe in which you're, you know, that's administering it or running it, you may be running into some NAGPRA responsibilities. So I always caution folks, you know, be really careful about that, especially on the tribal side, because we're not exempt. You know, we too have those same requirements. You know, we have that federal requirement, but I also encourage them, you know, in their tribal leadership to also think about your cultural requirements. You know, and so oftentimes, you know, what has happened is as tribes, we connect, you know, tribe to tribe. You know, we encourage, you know, individuals who come in or institutions, we try to refer them, you know, to the most likely tribes that it could be. And that's, you know, one of the ways in which we're, you know, trying to support one another.
Thank you. And it looks like that is all the questions in the Q&A as well as the chat. And I see that we're coming close to 1 p.m. here. So I think that's Couple thank yous in the chat. So I agree. Thank you, Desiree, Buffy, and Mario for being here today and for really offering your expertise in all of this wonderful information. I know that the attendees got a lot out of this. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate that. And just as we are wrapping up, just a reminder, if you are a CAM member, thank you so much for your membership. We really appreciate it. And if you have not yet become a member, we do hope you consider becoming a member of the California Association of Museums. There's wonderful resources and webinars and learning experiences, much like this Lunch and Learn series. And on the screen, there are a few more opportunities that are coming up soon. We've got some fundraising workshops beginning in August, and you can look at our website and find out more about that. And then we are right now in the thick of planning our Interwoven 2025 annual conference that's coming up February 18th through the 21st in San Francisco. And so we really hope that you join us during that time as well. And all of the information for both of these opportunities, as well as many, many more opportunities and resources, are at the California Association of Museums website. So please check that out for more information. I thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you at one of our next webinars. Thank you so much, everybody, and thanks again to the panelists.
Thank you. Bye.